Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Did you know Fast Growing Trees is America's largest and most trusted online nursery with thousands of trees and plants and over 2 million happy customers? Whether you're planting fruit trees, adding privacy, brightening things up with flowers, or bringing in houseplants, Fast Growing Trees has it all. Even better, they can help you find options that are right for your climate, your space, and lifestyle. Click Order Grow. Every plant arrives healthy with the Alive and Thrive guarantee straight to your door. So if you're ready to get planting, this is the moment. Right now, they have great deals on spring planting essentials, up to half off on select plants. And listeners to our show get 20% off their first purchase when using the code WWO at checkout. That's an additional 20% off. Better plants and better growing at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code WWO at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code WWO. Now's the perfect time to plant. Let's grow together. Use WWO to save today. Offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions apply. Go to growingfasttrees.com for details.
I'm here on the job site with Dale, who's a framing contractor.
Hey, good morning.
Dale traded up to Geico Commercial Auto Insurance for all his business vehicles. We're here where he needs us most.
Yep, they sure are.
We make it easy for him to save on all his insurance needs, all in one place, with coverage that fits his business and bottom line. Oh, I shouldn't have looked down.
It's all right.
We're so far up here.
Look at me. Take a deep breath.
No, I'm good. So good.
Get a commercial auto insurance quote today at geico.com and see how much you could save. It feels good to Geico.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Victoria, Lowe and Adrian Garvey. But before I start the episode, I just want to apologise for the quality of sound, which is below the usual standard. This was because of an outage of my internet service prior to the interview, which meant we had to do the interview via my phone, and you can tell there is a drop in quality. However, the conversation was so interesting, and I believe it's listenable. I think it's more than listenable. I think it's clear enough, but it's just obviously not up to my high and exacting standards. The book itself is acting and performance in Hitchcock, and is a collection of essays by various scholars. It's an excellent book. It's only just come out in March of this year, 2026. Distinguished film scholars look at film performances from Claude Rains in Notorious to Tippi Hedren in Marnie, going back even to the early silent era of his career, as well as the last years when he was an established, perhaps, in fact, almost certainly the most famous name director of that period of time. Apologies for the quality of the audio, but I hope that you enjoy the conversation nevertheless. Also, please, if you haven't already, you can buy a copy of my novel Connery via the link provided in the show notes. It's a film adjacent novel which features the growth and development of a young man whose life is affected by a series of meetings with a famous Scottish film star. It's funny and thrilling, dark, macabre by terms, and I'm told by people whose taste I respect, that it's a rather enjoyable read. So hopefully they're not flattering me. Please buy yourself a copy and tell me what you think. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to share it wherever you can. I'm no longer on Twitter, but that doesn't stop you from sharing it there if you wish. Otherwise, you can share it across the socials, Facebook, Instagram, wherever and however you can. That would be superb. Thank you so much, listeners, and enjoy the conversation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Adrian Garvey and Victoria.
Call me Vicky Lowe. Call me Vicky.
Vicky Lowe.
Only my mum calls me Victoria, or on books, so Vicky is fine. Okay,
so you were feeling chastised already when I said Victoria. You're like, oh no, oh, cripes, what have I done?
Exactly.
And you have edited a book on performance in the films of Alfred Hitchcock, a series of essays which are looking at performances in his films throughout his career. I wanted to read this book and I wanted to talk to you because it intersects with several things that I'm very interested in, and I'm sure our listeners are too. But can I ask you, first of all, if you sort of give us a general introduction to how you got involved with the project, and you probably do a better job of introducing the book itself than I've just done.
I don't know, Vicky, shall I say a little bit about the genesis of the book and you say about the book itself? Yeah, would that be? Yeah. Yes. Well, we've known each other, met at conferences and events and so on for several years, and share an interest in writing about film performance. But what really set this project off was a conference on Hitchcock that we both attended. I think it was 2019, not long before lockdown, autumn of 2019, a conference on Under Capricorn. Charles Barr, the great Hitchcock scholar, has over the past 10 years or so, has organized or co-organized with various colleagues conferences on specific Hitchcock films, usually tied to an anniversary. I think it was probably, what would it have been, 70 years since Under Capricorn, or 60 since Under Capricorn at that time. So some major films like Vertigo, but also some lesser known films being reappraised. And there were a day or two by leading scholars talking about the films. And Vicky and I bumped into each other at that. And Vicky suggested a study day that we organise a study day on acting in Hitchcock, which is not something I would ever have thought of, but it was such a brilliant idea. I think it was the root of this project, certainly. But it was astonishing to think how little has been written about this subject. I think there are some great pieces of work on performance in Hitchcock, but considering the enormous volume of writing that's been done on this director, far and away the most written about filmmaker, so little has been addressed to the role of acting. So we put that together. We contacted various colleagues who we thought might be interested. Put a good program together for a symposium. I think we ended up calling it, which was scheduled to happen at Birkbeck in 2020, but got knocked back by the lockdown, by the pandemic, as so many things did, obviously. So we postponed that for a year, ended up doing it on Zoom in the summer of 2021, and it included many of the authors who were finally in the book. Not everyone, unfortunately, could come with us for the written project, but it was hugely enjoyable, and I think very successful as well. We had some great papers, and decided after that we should put it in book form. Yes. So that's how the book came about, really, and very much thanks to Vicky's inspiration at the Under Capricorn conference.
Well,
yes.
I have to say, actually, Adrian, you're being very modest because actually both of us also have written on actors that have worked with Hitchcock. So, in fact, we did our PhDs. Adrian's brilliant PhD on James Mason, and mine rather less stellar one on Robert Donat. So
I think you're both being modest here. I will not have this.
Oh, well, that's great. But and I'd written an article for a Scope, a journal on Donat's performance in the 39 Steps, partly because I was intrigued by the sort of public pronouncements, if that's the right word, of Hitchcock, in terms of working with actors. But actually being able to look at Robert Donat's sort of personal archive of papers, which we are lucky to have up at the University of Manchester and the John Rylands Library, a different kind of picture emerged. So I had that kind of background coming into it, and Adrian's work with James Mason, obviously, with North by Northwest as well. So we were both kind of quite intrigued, I think, going into this project by what other great scholars would have to say about it, some of whom had written about Hitchcock and before, but some obviously hadn't.
It's an interesting point, the thing that you just said in terms of the pronouncements that Hitchcock has made, because obviously the most famous pronouncements are those which are probably the most dismissive of the actors as cattle, and they have to be, it's not the only one which is famous, but it's probably the most famous. And your book is very much a counterweight to that, and renders his. Well, what I got from it was there seemed to be as many views of Hitchcock directing actors as there were performances or actors working with Hitchcock.
Yes, I think that's right. Definitely, yes. He's he created for himself this very dismissive attitude towards actors. I think that is his signature quotation, really, and it's something that followed him around. And it's a classic bit of Hitchcock. It's a great one-liner. It's a great piece of publicity. It followed him throughout his career, and it's something he was very good at. But yes, it doesn't account at all for the many different ways I think he actually worked on set with actors. His reputation, is. There's wildly conflicting accounts of how he dealt with actors on set. He's been described as a sort of puppet master, someone who kind of would micromanage every aspect of a performance, particularly with less experienced actors, or actors new to cinema. Other actors have described him as indifferent to what they were doing. Doris Day on The Man Who Knew Too Much said that she assumed she was going to get fired after the first few days of working with him. He was a wonderfully sort of sociable and friendly off set, but on set he didn't communicate with her at all. And when she arranged for a meeting with a manager, realized that was told by him that it's because you're doing, I don't need to tell you what to do because you're doing what you're doing. So with experienced actors or actors he was familiar with, he let them get on with it. He only saw a need to direct if he had to change something. So there's a sense in which actors have talked about having a great deal of freedom on film with him. As long as they were working within the parameters that he set, they could get on with it. They could do what they want. So yes, there seems to be a very divergent, very broad spectrum of ways that he interacted with actors.
And I think also, Hitchcock, what was so brilliant about working with the performers with his films, and the performance in his film, of course, is that he kind of spans, a century of film, from sound to early sound, then also from Britain to Hollywood. So there were lots of different contexts as well in which he was working. And I think that kind of accounts also for some kind of different performances and different approaches to performance. And I was kind of quite interested, I think, in that early sound period, and particularly the way that he was often putting himself forward as a sort of proponent of the Kuleshov approach, of montage, of the way that meaning was created by in the camarade through montage. So again, that sort of de-skills the actor. We all know the famous Kuleshov experiment, with the child or something, the bowl of food, isn't it? Or a prisoner, and he looks at one thing. And Hitchcock himself, there's a brilliant scene that he does when he actually demonstrates montage. I think it's in one of the Paul Merton documentaries on Hitchcock, where he looks out and shows, first of all, a woman with a baby, and he's like the paternal kind of grandfather. And then he looks again, the same look, but it's a woman in a bikini. And he kind of goes, and he's a dirty old man. And I showed that to my students, and they go, yeah, he kind of looks like a dirty old man before as well. There's this sort of sense in which right from the early days of the Film Society in the late 1920s, he's putting this forward. And this is obviously a kind of viewpoint that de-skills the actors to a certain extent. But yeah, so, I mean, my chapter, I think, tries to kind of address that in different ways by looking at a very maligned kind of early sound picture that is a theatre, a play adaptation, and uses actors from the theatre as were used at that time. So looks at ways that actually, yes, there's the old Hitchcock kind of signature styles and the use of montage, but there's also times when I think he knows when to give space to the actors for kind of emotional engagement, and a kind of mixture of the two. And I think that still goes on in other films as well, later on in his career.
But how does that connect as well to the fact that he, in some of his films, I'm thinking of Dial M for Murder and Rope, he actually seems to be creating a sort of theatrical experience which very much promotes the actor, as especially Rope, of course, where you get rid of, as you say, the montage, which could effectively de-skill a performance. Instead, you're seeing an uncut take, and that take has to be technically perfect, and also, all the things you'd expect the performers to be able to do, emotional and convey their characters and subtleties and nuances and all the rest of it.
Absolutely, yes. Rope and Under Capricorn as well. Of course, there's I think it's about between 10 and 15 minutes as one of the kind of emotional high points of the film, dramatic high points of the film. This incredibly long take where Ingrid Bergman's character reveals the backstory and the kind of trauma that she's been hiding throughout the film. So yes, his films often give are like showcases for performance as well. Alongside those, montage sequences, there are many moments where actors are really, given the space to perform, where performance is really foregrounded, I think.
And he also worked very much with particular stars, didn't he? In ways that he could kind of undercut particular sort of star personas. In our book, I think Alex has written a brilliant chapter on Strangers on the Train and Robert Walker, and the way he kind of played about with that particular star persona, and sort of kind of wanted to really undercut that with a brilliant kind of performance by Robert Walker. So
yeah, actually, it works against type in that chapter.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I think. One of the criticisms, or what's seen as a limitation of Hitchcock's work with actors, is a reliance on stars. This idea that you cast Cary Grant or James Stewart in a film and you're just the job is done. That stars are just reproducing their personas in a film rather than performing in any creative way or innovative way. And I don't think that's true at all of stars generally. I think that's a prejudice against how stars operate in films. But so often, as with Walker, but Cary Grant and James Stewart and others, and Ingrid Bergman, he's sort of exploring aspects of their persona. You know, Cary Grant's incredibly unlike Cary Grant in Notorious. Cary Grant is playing a deeply unsympathetic, terse, angry, kind of repressed character in Notorious, totally unlike the normal, the standard screen persona, and he used stars very effectively and very creatively. I think, worked against their persona or undermined it or played with it very, very creatively, I think.
To go back I mean, you say something in the introduction to the book, which I really found fascinating, because this is something I'm struggling with at the moment, because I'm working currently on a biography of an actor. And I've previously written on directors, and suddenly I'm asking myself very basic questions like, what makes a good performance? Who is responsible for a good performance? How much can I judge this to be the actor's work, or is this being put together in the edit? Or, and there are some films recent films. Recently I watched Dune 2, and I was thinking, wow, there's not much Timothée Chalamet actually speaking on screen here. It's a lot of reaction shots and a lot of stuff happening which isn't him being directly on camera delivering his lines. You hear the lines over somebody else. And I started to wonder, have they tried to save a performance here? Is this? And I'm wondering about sort of analyzing acting as on screen more generally, which I think your book is a really good. And obviously, one of the other things is I started to think, God, I could imagine a whole series of books like acting in Kubrick films and acting in which would all open up different questions about performance on film. I'm sorry, Vicky, I'll put that to you. So.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's a really good question. And I think, I think in terms of academically, film acting was kind of late to the party, really, in terms of writing. Work kind of started with Richard Dyer, of course, on Stars. And then only that then was kind of the idea of separating out acting kind of came out of that. I would say it is quite difficult to write in some ways about it. I mean, to answer your first question, what makes a good actor? I'm going to go back to Robert Donat here, who I think was thinking very much aloud about acting in the 1930s. He published a chapter called Film Acting in a book actually where Hitchcock was writing about directing, called Footnotes to the Film in 1937, I think. And he talks very much about the way that the actor has to work with the camera. So needs to actually, so it might look natural, but actually what you need to do is to develop a really good technique to make that look natural. And that's knowing what lenses might be used. So if you're in close-up, what's in frame, knowing that you need to look at a particular spot, so there's all sorts of manner of things that you need to be able to do. You also need to be able to kind of calibrate the overall performance, because of course you might be kissing your co-star in the first, the final scene on the first day of filming, and then you're looking at it in a different way. So one of the documents I was fascinated by in the Donat archive was something called the emotion chart, where he he did one first of all for The Citadel that's still extant, and then he also did one for Goodbye Mr. Chips, for which he won the Oscar in 1939. And that was like a sort of temperature chart, really, of where, and I'm guessing the kind of intensity of performance at different points in the film, so that he knew what he had to bring to set that day, even if it was filmed, not in the right order or so. And of course, in Mr. Chips, it goes, I don't know if you know the film at all, but he goes through many kind of changes, from very young to very old. So it was really important to get that continuity. So I think that's I think that's how I think I got a really greater appreciation, really, for the work of what actors do, by looking at what he was sort of talking about. I don't know, in terms of writing, I mean, Cynthia Barron, I think, is a great writer who's written on screen performance, reframing screen performance. And she argues that there is ways that you can kind of analyze and break down a scene and think of it in terms of beats and see how it's kind of constructed and how gestures are used in particular ways, or the whole body. And of course, the voice. So both me and Adrian are kind of completely obsessed with actors and their voices and how they might use their voices in particular ways. Obviously, taking on board that it might be kind of post-synced or recorded afterwards. So I think when you start to pay attention, there's really loads of things that you can see that actors are doing. I was just reading Tamar's wonderful chapter on Doris Day in our book, and she talks very much about how Doris Day performs performing, and she tells us that through these kind of small gestures that she's of sort of nervousness, or the way she uses her voice and the way she uses her eyes to kind of look off out of the frame, so that we know that she's performing this song so that her son can hear to be rescued. So I think all those things can help you to really start to kind of think about how important, really, because, the human figure is what we engage with in a film. So that the work the actor's doing, I think, is important to be recognised somehow.
I think I agree entirely with that, Vicky, and I think the idea of performance within Hitchcock's films is very interesting as well. That his films, in addition to looking at the performances of particular actors in his films, working on this book made me very aware of how much performance is a theme in his films, and his films are full of people pretending to be other people or concealing their identities. There's lots of performers in his films. There's lots of people playing actors or performers. There's lots of scenes on stage with interactions between the audience and the performers, and the kind of lines between on and off stage life begin to blur. Kim Novak in Vertigo, Judy and Madeline is a most obvious example, I suppose, of somebody pretending to be somebody else. Somebody said that we're watching Kim Novak playing Judy, playing Madeline for a lot of the film, and with repeated viewings, especially, one's so aware of the way in which that performance is being framed and delivered. Yes, people, Notorious, the film I write about, Bergman's character Ingrid Bergman's character spends a lot of the time pretending to be somebody else. And then Claude Rains becomes aware that he's being fooled, and he begins to assume he begins to pretend to perform that husband, although he knows he's being deceived. And there's this term of diegetic performance, which an academic called Donna Perbody has written about, which I think is very useful for understanding performance in Hitchcock. People are so often pretending to performing their characters, and we as the audience are aware of this fiction and this false character they're playing. So I think he's a director. In addition to films that include incredible performances, performance is thematically very important to understanding Hitchcock's work.
I was just reading before we came on air David Greven's great chapter as well on Ray Milland. It's Tony, and he writes that performance is like a mode of self-presentation, basically, because Tony is always playing the role of the husband, playing the role of the multiple roles within that film. So it really does. I think that's something that we found when we got the chapters in, how much it kind of emerged as a theme.
Absolutely.
Throughout all of the chapters, really.
And I mean,
it's strange.
Sorry, carry on, John. Yes.
No, continue, Adrian.
No, I was going to say, to return to your point about how we can evaluate the actor's contribution, that is a challenge, and I think it's often a challenge in Hitchcock, partly because of the way he has presented. The way he tends to talk about actors as, frustrating him, or him having to find ways round of achieving what he wants to achieve. And a performance, Joan Fontaine as the second Mrs. De Winter in Rebecca is a performance that has been described as being achieved entirely by Hitchcock through editing, or through kind of psychological game playing with her, where he was making her feel alienated from the rest of the cast, to encourage that idea. And it's impossible for us really to establish what contribution she is making, but I'm very resistant to the idea of this. It's a very common idea, really, I think, for actresses, for female performers, that a male director is kind of getting this performance out of them. Is kind of still we get this prejudice idea that male actors have technique, and female performers are have emotions or feelings that need to be drawn out of them. And I think it's a great piece of work. The resulting performance is a great piece of work, and it's impossible to say how much has been achieved through editing or through manipulation, if you like, of the performer. But I find it's hard to believe that Joan Fontaine is not making an important contribution in that film, in her role, and judging through her other work as well. She was not a newcomer to film in that time, if relatively inexperienced. And yes, I think there's some of the writing about the way Hitchcock has worked with performers reflect.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
It's a prejudice about the way actresses are discussed generally and perceived to be contributing to the films they appear.
And also,
yes,
sorry to jump in there.
Sorry.
But also, they often mix up. Oh, sorry. They mix up the actual kind of performer and the character.
Yes, yeah.
Talking about the character, that's what the performance is doing. It's not So I think there's Lucy Bolton writes brilliantly about Tippi Hedren in this respect. It's not that she's actually showing the kind of masquerade. She's not icy. She's wooden. She's playing icy, and that because that's necessary for the character to kind of make sense. And to talk about her in that way really undermines her agency and her incredible skill. Really.
Absolutely.
And it's also a bit of Hitchcock's self-aggrandizement as well, that he wants to be this, he wants to be this director and to claim authorship. Whereas I think the essays in the book and your introduction also present kind of a concerted argument for actors as authors of their own work, that they are contributing to a great extent. And I'm glad we brought up this issue of female actors, because obviously this is the controversy as well as being this huge star maker and employer of female actors and performances. Hitchcock has crossed the line. We know that from the situation in Marnie. A film that kind of works almost despite itself, and the reason it works is, I feel personally, because of Tippi Hedren's performance and that remarkable moment where she turns to her mother and says, "Don't you love me?" And that To go back to what and connect it to what we were talking about earlier, that idea of diegetic performance, non-diegetic performance, and how that compromises any notion of the self. Because if we're all just these performances, what is the raw self? What is and that moment feels like we've actually got right down to the nub of the character, if that's not mixing my metaphors too much. But this is the absolute bottom, and that to me is just raw Tippi Hedren, and it's the most sort of un-Hitchcockian moment, if you like. It's or maybe it's the apex of Hitchcock. I'm not, I'm,
Sure.
I'm stuck in paradoxes. How would Vicky? How would you? How would you respond?
Absolutely,
to that?
no. I think, I mean, I think you just have to separate out, the stuff that Hitchcock says really, and kind of go beyond that in lots of ways. I mean, I felt very strongly, there's the terrible abuse that Tippi Hedren obviously suffered, and affected her career, and rightly it's come to light, and rightly, Hitchcock has been, roundly condemned. The issue is that if the narrative keeps returning to that, it blocks out what Hedren was able to do, really, and feels like such a loss of potential. I mean, she obviously appeared in other films as well, but I agree with you, that moment is extraordinary, and it so then works, I think, with the whole performance when you see how much she's trying to desperately survive in a patriarchal world, these horrible male bosses, and with these moments, and I think with these moments where there is some kind of connection actually with the other female characters as well, and both the authors, both in Lucy writes both about Marnie, but also about the birds, is the way that making those connections with the other female characters, that Tippi Hedren shows that kind of mask slipping somehow. So I thought it's really important. I mean, I have to say, my one regret is that we didn't have more actresses in the book. We were going to have something on Kim Novak, but that didn't come to fruition, as ever always happens with these edited collections. Some things we can see through to the end, and some can't. Maybe that can be the sequel in the end.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Volume 2.
Yes. I mean, I don't. We'll be producing a volume 2 ourselves, but yes, I think it really does.
Adrian's looking horror here.
No. But it really is just opening up the area in many ways. This book, there are so many. There are 9 chapters. We cover more than 9 films. Obviously, I'm not quite sure how many films are discussed in detail in the book. It's about 10 or 11, I suppose. But yes, he made so many films, but so many films that are rich in performances as well. There are many other great Hitchcock performances to write about, I think, definitely.
Let's talk about some of the biggies, because of course there are people that he worked with again and again and again, and there are some people who he worked with only one time and yet had a massive, Anthony Perkins in Psycho is huge, despite the fact that that's his only performance for Hitchcock. James Stewart, for instance, is one of those characters who, in some ways, he's playing with a persona that's already there and has, to some degree, been tested in It's a Wonderful Life. We've seen glimmers of madness, and then Anthony Mann uses him in his Western so well.
Yes.
It almost becomes the point that his anti-persona is stronger than his persona at the point, that he's. But Hitchcock is interesting that he uses both, really. He tests it, and yet also he uses it as the everyman, if you like, the American everyman.
Absolutely, yes. No, I think, yes, you're absolutely right. Of course, yes, that Stewart's kind of famous, all-American persona was being tested in many ways especially in the 1950s and especially in those Anthony Mann films. But yes, it is extraordinary the way he uses him in Vertigo, and how far Stewart himself is sort of prepared to go. I think it is a phenomenal performance, and Grant, his other big recurring male star, Cary Grant, as I mentioned in Notorious, especially in Notorious, but in Suspicion as well. They were both, very, willing to kind of expose their darker sides very, very interestingly in Hitchcock, or for Hitchcock.
I love Jimmy Stewart in Rear Window as well. And I think, I mean, there's so cleverly encases him in kind of plaster at the very beginning. So that physicality, that he has so much so in the Capra films and everything, you feel his kind of frustration as well. So I think he works with that quite cleverly. And he's a voyeur. I mean, how could he do this to the all-American hero? And weirdly not interested in Grace Kelly when she kind of leans down to kiss him. So all these things I think are really. But again, Jimmy Stewart was very, I think, aware of the fact that he was playing about with that persona. So it kind of works. And then of course Vertigo is he's just wonderful. That the scene where he's at the end, the kind of famous, the sort of moulding scene and everything, and the neuroticism, the eyes. I mean, he uses his eyes, I think, James Stewart, in extraordinary ways. They literally, if you get a sort of screen grab of them, they are kind of almost unhinged, I think. So I think he was a great. He brought to bear, obviously, all those kind of things that we were talking about before in terms of knowing how to kind of transmit a performance on the screen, really, and should be, credited with that as well.
I thought it's also interesting that we have in Marnie, we have Sean Connery coming in as one of his very earliest sort of non-Bond, but big roles. It's his biggest sort of Hollywood role that isn't James Bond, and his only direction to Connery was, when you're listening to someone speak, close your mouth.
Yes. There was something else about pause that he told him as well that I can't remember the details of now. He holding up his hands like a typical bad Hitchcock pun, holding up his hands like dog's paws to convey to him he wanted him to pause, to make sure he paused between between his words. But yes,
he does a good. Yeah, sorry, carry on. No.
So do go on,
I was just thinking about kind of the male neuroticism that again links a lot of the sort of male performances that we're looking at, really, in the book as well. So Richard Todd, obviously, in Stage
absolutely,
Fright,
yes.
That Melanie talks about, and this kind of post-war masculinity. That it's all sort of revealing itself to be kind of scarred and flawed. And again, a fantastic sort of performance that Hitchcock gets out of Richard Todd, where the kind of facade cracks at a certain point and the kind of utter desperation is really kind of revealed.
It sort of goes back to what we were saying a few minutes ago about performance and identity and how things can shatter, especially with masculinity. There is this idea that early on in Hitchcock's films, you get an idea of a very controlled, almost at ease, relaxed, James Stewart as a professor in Rope, or even Anthony Perkins talking to Marion Crane, Janet Leigh in Psycho, and seeming like the boy next door, perfectly ordinary. Every time I watch that film, I forget that he's Norman Bates. I mean, Norman sounds normal in this situation. Much to my shock later on in the film, as I discover, as we've been talking about, it's a performance within a performance.
Absolutely, yes, and not one sadly covered in the book, but yes, it is one of the greatest performances. And Perkins is someone else who very much enjoyed working with Hitchcock, who found he was sort of open to collaborative performance from his actors who could take suggestions, who was interested. Yes, he clearly, was delivering what Hitchcock wanted. So Hitchcock gave him his freedom to play it as he chose. And Janet Leigh as well. So much of the film rests on her face. The first, whatever it is, the first 3/4 of an hour of the film, and she does that so superbly. I think, for me, definitely another one of the greatest performances in his film.
Yes, and I think don't you mention as well in the I might be mixing this up, but I think you mentioned in the introduction about how the remake of Psycho shows how these gestures and how the physicality of the performers, how important it is, because you see Vince Vaughn is huge, Anthony Perkins is looks like a strong gust of wind would blow him away.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. We in the introduction we cite a couple of other pieces of work that relate to this. What's it called? The commutation test, where you put different actors into you in a way you can understand the star's persona or the role of performance by comparing different actors. And yes, the remake of Psycho, the Gus Van Sant Psycho, is perfect for that, because it's a virtual remake, but so entirely different. In part because, as you say, of the physicality of the different actors. Yes, it is a. I don't know if it would work in relation to the Man Who Knew Too Much. Obviously, where there's a 30s version and a 50s version. I suppose it would be interesting to think about comparative performances in those two Hitchcock films as well.
Absolutely, and also you can have that perhaps with most of these films go through a variety of casting suggestions before arriving on their final cast. So what if Cary Grant had been in Marnie? What if Grace Kelly had been in Marnie, for that matter? That was obviously touted to begin with, but which was I think the idea was her status as part of the royal family didn't gel well with the controversial nature of the script.
Yes, no, absolutely. I'm trying to remember. As Vicky mentioned, I've done work on James Mason, and before North by Northwest, which I think he's very good in. He was considered for a few Hitchcock films right at the beginning of his Hollywood career. I think possibly Rope. I think possibly the James Mason role in Rope. Sorry, the James Stewart role in Rope, the Professor. So yes, it is fascinating to think of these, alternative versions with different performers in them. Definitely, yes.
What about?
Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
No.
I was thinking. It's going down another route that we did. I remember consider the idea of trying to get somebody to write about Hitchcock's performances in Hitchcock's films.
This is my next question.
Yes, right. Yes. It is obviously such a unique contribution by a director to a film, and in thinking about performance, you have the director there in virtually all his films in very arresting ways. I think, is it called Double Take? I think there's a film that kind of plays with that uses the clips, but I don't know that anything's really been written in any depth. And it is fascinating to think about how he he acted in his own films, and why he did that as well. Why, or considering why he did it. Yes.
And also, of course, in a TV series and in the publicity campaigns, he's very much a public performer.
Yes, exactly. Yes,
which sort of changes his pronouncements on acting as well, because you're sort of thinking, well, if actors are cattle, so are you, mister.
Yes, the whole Hitchcock persona that he created. And mentioning the television, something else that it would have been, we looked into, we don't really discuss the Alfred Hitchcock Presents and the television. There's a wealth of material, some of which he directed himself. He was obviously the producer of that series, but he directed many episodes himself. And there's a whole wealth of very interesting work in those films. And sometimes one can compare performers who appeared in his films and his television programs. Barbara Bel Geddes, around the time of Vertigo, appears in a very different role. I can't think what is it's a Roald Dahl story. I can't remember the name of the episode now. A famous one where she's to spoil the she almost gets away with murder. She's murdered her husband with a frozen lamb chop.
Leg of lamb, yes.
Leg of lamb. That's it. Yes. So yes, playing a murderer around the same time she's playing Midge in Vertigo is a fascinating comparison of very different performances. Yes,
I mean he was a showman, wasn't he? Hitchcock, basically, and and he was also, I think, very cannily able to sort of circulate a visual image of him. He was pre-Instagram, before Instagram, in terms of. And obviously moving as an unknown director to Hollywood as well. So I think all of these sort of ways of creating a kind of marketable persona for him, that also stamped him with those sort of auteur credentials as well. The puppet master was in a very uncertain, in the studio system and the different systems that he worked in, was a way of kind of navigating that and obviously creating more kind of power for himself as he went on, throughout his career.
And a way of navigating, I mean, he's using the star system, but he's also making sure that he himself is a star, so he can almost deal with them on an equal footing.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it's fascinating the way he becomes a figure on the film posters. The most famous one is the hit the psycho one of not letting people in, but long before that he's appearing as this character on the posters for his films. The television introduction, the television series obviously enlarged that or perfected that, but he was so astute in developing that image from very early on in his career, really.
There's a little squiggle, wasn't there? The Alfred Hitchcock profile. That kind of, like
absolutely.
Brand that
yes. And the show the TV show even gave him his own theme tune as well.
Which we
quite extraordinary. Yes.
It's quite literally becoming iconic because you could recognize his silhouette. You don't need to even see him, Hitchcock and Mickey Mouse. And
one thing, something you have said before, Vicky, I know that I think bears repeating, that I think he was he had a great interest in acting. He was a big theatre goer, alongside all this dismissiveness. He was someone who was very interested in watching actors. For casting his films, he often drew on his knowledge of theatre. He was going in from the 20s in the West End, and then seeing a lot of theatre in America subsequently. So I think he was much more interested in acting than and actors than his public persona would indicate, really.
And I'm just thinking, it's making me thinking of Michael Williams' chapter on Ivor Novello, where actually Ivor Novello was much more famous than Hitchcock at that point.
Yes,
he was the name that was actually selling the film, and there was and there were these amazing kind of live sort of hybrid live and sort of recorded performances that were done to publicize the film. So that's another kind of link with the theatrical, really.
In a way, that to me represents perhaps that his dismissiveness was much more like a power play over the actors, that if I can reduce you down, then I won't feel so dependent upon you. And on the other hand, there was a lot of respect for actors because, you doing what you do, I'm not going to get in your way. If you're going, that magic that you do is something that I can't touch. And I was wondering about how one of his major clashes was with the so-called method actor Montgomery Clift, who he had a real battle with. And again, if he was rightly criticized for his behavior towards Tippi Hedren, I think his behavior towards Montgomery Clift could equally be criticized in, purposefully getting him drunk because he couldn't he couldn't take his alcohol, and he was an alcoholic. He shouldn't have been encouraging him as a way of sort of breaking him down and humiliating him. It seemed to be a clash of sensibility and a sort of a claim for authorship as well. I'm gonna make sure you're not gonna be as famous as I am in the story.
Absolutely, I think yes. No, I think it's very much about the exercise of power, and especially having moved to Hollywood, where the star system privileged actors to such an extent. There was a star system in operation in British cinema, but not to anything like this, the extent. And I think this whole attitude to actors was really sort of consolidated in Hollywood, partly as a way of challenging the primacy of stars. He wasn't interested in making star vehicles. He wasn't there to serve the actors. He was there to make the films he wanted to make. So it was a way of stamping his authority and yes, asserting his power over stars.
Yes. So we're gonna be coming towards the end now. So one thing I wanted to ask you, and this is going to be an impossible question. Well, what would be your favorite performance in a Hitchcock film? What performance do you think would you had, for whatever reason? I'll allow you to choose your own criteria. But what would be your favorite performance, Vicky?
Oh God, am I allowed two?
Yes, of course you are. Of course.
Do I have to put it down to one?
No, you can have two.
Okay. Well, I've taught Vertigo for so long now, and I just am always in awe of Kim Novak, really. I find those layers of performance within performance of Judy, I'm going to forget the name now as well, Madeline, and the way that she portrays them through the sort of gestures, tiny gestures, but the vulnerability that she shows. I mean, I just love it. I can watch it all over and over again. I probably have to say Robert Donat in the 39 Steps with his toothbrush moustache, because otherwise I'll be haunted by him. But that's another of my favourite ones too.
Wonderful choices. And of course, there's a documentary out just now about Kim Novak, which is just recently, I think it was last year at Venice that it premiered. Adrian, same question?
I mean, yes, I would have to go with Ingrid Bergman in Notorious. I think I write about that film in my chapter, but I'm actually writing about Claude Rains, who I think is also giving a great performance. But for me, she is the I'm a huge admirer of her work generally, but she is really the ultimate Hitchcock star for me. And I think that film, which is my favorite among his films, she's just superb. in it. It's an incredible piece of sort of emotional acting. It's a great kind of tortured sort of love story as well. But I think she's superb in it. Yeah, so I would, if I had to choose, it would be that one.
Yeah. Okay.
I do love as well that you mentioned Midge earlier on, as
yes.
I also think that he's great with these, these character roles. Rear Window, for instance, is like a panorama, an ensemble of superb character roles who complement the two leads, and
yes. Yes, and Susan Pleshette in The Birds, which I just watched again recently, is so brilliant in that film. Yes. There are many great supporting players in Hitchcock. Yes.
Even in The Birds, a very young Veronica Cartwright, who would then appear in Alien.
That's right. Yes.
So I'm really drilling down deep here. So, final question to you both then. I would love to have a recommended film book from you. Adrian?
Well, it is. I don't suppose it has to be on acting, but this one is on acting. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but James Narramore, who's generally a brilliant writer on film, I think one of my favourites. His book, Acting in the Cinema, is hugely important book on this subject, and one of the first really landmark books. He covers it in such depth. He gives lots of great individual chapters on specific actors or performance, including a wonderful one on Cary Grant in North by Northwest. But yes, so I that would be my choice. Yes,
I'm definitely. From reading your introduction, I've got that on my reading list now.
Oh, great.
That's definitely one I want to dive into. Vicky?
Well, you talking about Montgomery Clift actually made me remember how much I appreciated. It's a book called Montgomery Clift, Queer Star by Elisabetta Girelli. A really fascinating kind of exploration, I think, of this very underappreciated actor. So I'd recommend reading that.
Yeah, I wrote an essay about the John Huston film Freud for the DVD that came out. And another director who had a lot of problems with Montgomery Clift and Susanna York in the making of that film, but he's just such a I agree with you. He's so raw as an actor and so interesting. Well, that's another one I've got to put on my recommending my reading list, which is never going to go down, but. It doesn't matter. Life's all about books and films and occasionally a cup of coffee. Thank you so much for joining me, Adrian, and thank you, Vicky.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.